The ramifications of that theft will end up being a depression that'll make the Great Depression look like a piker. I believe when this hits the fan, you will be looking at 35% unemployment. You will be looking at devaluation at a minimum on houses at 40%. Make no mistake, when you look at Case to Depot and you look at their assets and what they hold in Montreal, those assets will devalue, and they're not the greatest assets to begin with, but they will devalue 40 to 50%.
The point you touched on about Canadian employees, now I think it's 1 in 4. So 25% of the entire population, working population, works for the government, which is just completely insane. So they are creating the depression, breaking the back of mom and pop, replacing them with government employees that then detract even more because essentially, obviously, government, more red tape, more regulation, more taxes. That's what you're going to get from government employees. So you end up just taking away more from mom and pop who could create goods and services which could actually increase production.
And it gets worse because the reason I use that terminology, the rats will eat the rats. What do you think is going to happen when mom and pop actually hit a depression?
Crime skyrocket.
Government cannot generate jobs. The idea that a government creates jobs is complete nonsense, right? There's no economic engine for those jobs to be created.
So
you're doing it on the back of the taxpayers. And that's why I said the taxpayers have the power when they understand what's going on. And one thing that can be done in Canada, because just like here, like we've got, as an example, a fellow reached out to me. He's 84 years old. He bought his house for $24,000. His tax liability this year is $3,100. He's obviously on fixed income. He doesn't have the money. That's in Ohio. We got emails coming in from across the United States like this. You're breaking the back of the economic system. If you break the back of mom and pop, you are going to make people desperate. If you make people desperate, they are going to do desperate things. Dumbass governments, wake up. Put the power back in the hands of mom and pop so they can make a living, they can pay for their children's education. That is the economic engine moving forward. The idea you can take, and you can create money and you can print money is complete nonsense. It isn't true. No. This has gone on since I left Canada. And frankly, I left Canada because of this, right? When the government said at that time, well, we're thinking about putting in rent controls, that was for me shot across the bow. My grandfather said, this is no longer your home. You can't do what you can do. You've got to go somewhere else. So that somewhere else, through some research, et cetera, ended up being Dallas. But I could never have done in Canada what I've done here. And I was able to do here because I came from Canada. So clearly my heart bleeds in both places, but I understand what it is to have an economic engine. I know what it is when the Canadian government at the border creates something that's called work to rule. In essence, they lock down the border. I know that Windsor, 34 years ago, downtown Windsor was destroyed. All the businesses ended up closing because the Canadian government went work to rule to slow down the Americans from coming in. So these are all games that very stupid, ignorant people in the government level play. I have zero sympathy for them. They are causing the problems. They are breaking the back of mom and pop. And we've got gigabytes worth of data sitting on that website that explains how it's being done, what the ramifications are, who did it. We even have a chart, Travis called it the FBI chart. We're naming names. We're naming positions. We're naming the fact that they don't want to enforce their own jobs. Well, that's the same thing you've got in Canada. These things are directly 100% correlated.
Yeah, that is just completely crazy. And could you just quickly explain what the work to rule actually was? Because I thought that was incredibly interesting as well.
Well, Canadian government does things for nefarious reasons, as does any government.
Yeah, just true.
What they said at that time is there's too much money rolling into Windsor and we want it. And if we don't get it by virtue, because they couldn't increase the taxes. So as retribution, they forced the border agents at the Canadian Bridge and the Canadian Tunnel to start picking on the Americans, make it uncomfortable for them to come over. Well, my mother had a dress store at that time. And it was a very successful dress store, and a lot of Americans came in. But when the government switched to this work to rule to slow the flow of Americans down, that business was destroyed. And all the businesses, virtually all, in downtown Windsor were destroyed to the point it never came back. Like if you go into downtown Windsor today, you'll still see empty storefronts. These countries need each other. They need the flow. And then just recently, so the Canadian government says, yeah, we're going to go build another bridge. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's a stunning piece of architecture. But was it necessary? No. Why did they do it? Because they got into a pissing contest with a Michigan company that owns the bridge, right? This was done on pure ego, not based on math. Will that bridge ever pay for itself? To be determined. I have my doubts. So it was done on pure ego. And yeah, you can say, okay, the Ambassador Bridge was old, et cetera, but it was functioning. It's been rebuilt multiple times. It would continue. The idea of spending billions, hundreds, to build a new bridge, what is it going to add to the city of Windsor economically? Nothing. Why? Because it's truck traffic. So the truck traffic is going to go through, as it always does, right through Windsor, up here on line and up to Toronto. So it doesn't add anything in reality in terms of economic value. Does anybody bother to look at that math? No. So you have governments doing things that are nefarious for purposes of ego. Well, we're doing this for the population. Yeah, no, you're not. There's no math to back up that statement. So now what's going to happen? What are you going to do if the Canadian government one day wakes up and says, yeah, we're going to do another work to rule on the new bridge? Okay, you see the problem?
Yeah, I mean, they'll probably just end up increasing all those property values around Windsor, the bridge, and saying, okay, now, well, properties are worth 20% more because we built this extra bridge, which is adding nothing. And then they'll try and get the people who live there through the fraudulent means to pay for that bridge.
The University of Windsor campus is not safe. To the west side of the University of Windsor campus is what's called Sandwich West. Literally, it is on the west side of the bridge by about 50 feet. Mm-hmm. Sandwich West, all the way into LaSalle, it would be the equivalent of walking down the street in war-torn Lebanon, okay? It's a frickin' nightmare. Mm-hmm. They've got houses there that were built in the early 1900s, rat-torn, destroyed, bad roofs, never looked after, because it's on what was at one time the old industrial section for Windsor, and it's across from Zug Island. It's got all sorts of economic problems. Now, if you took a bulldozer and went in there and just flattened the whole thing and started over, okay, that would make some sense. But the idea of the Canadian government saying, well, but these are historic buildings and we want to rebuild it. This stuff is functionally obsolescent. It was functionally obsolescent when I was there. And it hasn't been occupied since. So again, stupid things based on a belief, not backed up by math. There's no quantitative analysis of any of this. And this is why the government's got its hand out saying, give me more money, taxpayer. We need more money to cover off our cumulative fraud. We're at the end point. We're at the tipping point. Mom and pop don't have the money.
No, they don't. And I mean, bankruptcies, literal bankruptcies right now are skyrocketing in Ontario. And that is one of the places where you've seen the most fraud happen. If you look at the housing values in some places going up like 300% over the course of 5-6 years.
Well, it gets even worse. So watch this for a second. If you're a border patrol on the Canadian side, you've got a decent paying job. That's good. But if your property taxes, because the people that are charging you in taxes are the same people that are charging everybody else on taxes. If your property taxes go up, just because you've got a decent paying job, you don't get ahead. They're taking your money on the fraud of a 40% increase in the value of your home that doesn't exist to begin with. So even if you can break it down to the people who are culpable in all this, they too are getting hurt. So if somebody is lying to you and they're going to hurt their family and they're going to hurt their friends to take a party line, that is the definition of a sociopath. My point is, if you're going to act like a sociopath, then you have to be treated like one. If you're going to tell the truth and create that economic engine and not bankrupt your population, hallelujah. But you can't be on both sides of that issue. Yeah. Mom and pop don't have the money. There's no other way to say it. I mean, the bankruptcies here are skyrocketing just like they are over in Canada. They're out of money. 37% of the population, household population in Denton County are going to go bankrupt and or they are going to lose the roof over their head. That population controls about 30,000 houses. What the hell do you think is going to happen when 30,000 houses in Denton County hit the market at the same time? And for those people who are saying, well, I'm a millionaire, I don't have to worry about it. First of all, highly unlikely. But if 30,000 houses hit the market at the same time, I'm sorry, that affects every property value in the chain. That affects every single business in the chain. That's the tipping point. And what I'm trying to do through all of this is point out to the politicians, get on board and fix this problem fast. Because if you don't, you deserve what's coming your way. You are making the population desperate. And if you make people desperate, desperate things will happen. I'm trying to stop that from happening, put the power back in the hands of mom and pop, stop stealing the money. And they cannot get away. We're headed for the appellate court shortly within the next 60 days. The state of Texas keeps punting. We are fully prepared to take this to the U.S. Supreme Court. We're ready to rock and roll right now. If they call tomorrow morning, we're ready. So we will do whatever is necessary to keep this moving forward. But I recognize the damage on both sides of the border. and it's not good.
No, yeah, the damage is huge and the knock on effects are massive because obviously the other side and part to this is what happens with the banking sector and the financial sector. Because obviously, if people are getting loans based off fraudulent appraisal values, then the assets on the bank's balance sheet, the loans, the
Yeah.
collateral, the
Well,
collateral that
it's the
backs
same
the
thing. It's
loans.
the same thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the assets and the collateral are the same thing. So watch this. 60 days ago, we get a pair of buildings in downtown Denver, 378,000 square feet. These buildings are drop dead gorgeous. They are the spit image of the Bass Brothers buildings in downtown Fort Worth. This stuff in today's world to build, $1,000 a foot all day long. The buildings are 30% occupied. The banker that took them back called me and said, would you look at this and figure out what can be done with it, and we'll give you the money. We, the bank, will give you the money. So I said, okay, let me run it. So Leslie and I sat down. It took us 3 days to go through it, and we did an analysis on the economics, and we figured out that over a 10-year hold, if we sat on it for 10 years and got the occupancy to come up 10% a year, do you know that the property would not make 10 cents in profit after 10 years? It's so
Jeez.
badly gone that its economic life is over. Then I said, okay, fine. Let's do what we do. Let's look at adaptive reuse. Let's try and switch this over to multifamily. The floor plates were massive, and that's not conducive for multifamily because of a variety of fire reasons. You got to be able to open the windows. You got to be second bedrooms, etc. So we said, okay, fine. Let's notch a C-section out of the middle of these buildings. What's the cost? So we started running that math, and I reached out to another builder that I know, and I said, just double check. It's about $500 a foot. Okay, that didn't work.
No.
So the reality was that what you have being held by that bank is an asset whose value is land value minus demolition. Here's the problem. Even if you buy it as land value minus demolition, how long is it going to take before you find a use for that land? Because land
Yeah.
is only worth what you can do with it. So at the tail end, I said, look, I called him back and said, here's the problem. If you want me to take it and take it off your hands, I'm going to tear it down, but you're going to have to write a check. I'm not going to buy this building for $1. It's a straight up liability. I know you're familiar with Detroit, but you do realize that Detroit went bankrupt. And for anybody to say that a city in the United States can't go bankrupt, it already has. Right now, today in Detroit, there's 85,000 single family homes with demolition permits issued and no money to tear them down. So the idea that real estate goes up, 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 and up and never stops is beyond sociopath. I mean, you're just a straight up pathological liar because it isn't true. The evidence already exists in the United States. Cities can file bankruptcy. States can file bankruptcy. The pension fund in Chicago has caused all of Illinois to be bankrupt. They cannot pay off ever their unfunded liabilities.
Jeez.
So every mom and pop, you need every other mom and pop to start tilting the scale back where it's supposed to be so that you're not bankrupt. Elections matter. If you don't put people in place who understand what it is that we're speaking of here today, that's on you. Find the people that understand what's going on, that can literally read the documents and understand the math. That should be the guiding principle. The guiding principle should be restore the power back to mom and pop so they're not going to go bankrupt under our watch.
Well, yeah, because like you said, they are the engine of the economy. And if you destroy them, then you're destroying the economy essentially. And that's what we're having happen, especially with this government job creation and just with bankrupting them through all this fraud. And essentially now almost when you buy a home, the property tax is that high that it's almost like you're leasing the land off the city or the municipality.
Do you know that the War of 1812 was literally fought on this issue?
No, I did not know that.
In London, well, you have the king, King Charles. Okay, King Charles right now today, where is their economic power coming from? It's the land under Kensington. It's the land on the south of London because that's owned by the crown. That's the economic engine for the crown. The Americans in 1812, because the British wanted to do the same thing. They said, yeah, we want a tax from you, but they weren't creating any value. So the Americans said, yeah, screw you, in their own language at that time, and said, yeah, we're not going to put up with it. Poof, War of 1812. Right now, what they have done, these governments have literally reverted the population into slavery without benefit of value. You must pay these taxes or we will take your home. In the United States, that falls under RICO. It's a straight up racketeering, and it's all on the website. We've laid the whole case out. They can't get away from it. Literally, that document I sent you is 10 pages of broken laws, state, federal, RICO, You name it, they broke it. And it all stems from that one fact. You're not doing appraisals under any definition in law. You are literally lying to the population. And you're so arrogant and so ignorant, you don't even understand that you're hurting yourself, your family, and your friends by allowing this nonsense to continue. So you're either on board with stopping it, or you're a government employee, and by definition, you're a sociopath. If you believe in this crap, you're a sociopath. You're hurting your own family. And that's where Jeremy came in and said, listen, these appraisers are even being forced to commit fraud because they won't get a job. They'll be cut off if they don't come up with the value. That's not a system.
And that's so important as well to understand, like that if an appraiser comes out to value the house and they're not putting in the value where the bank wants it, where the appraisal district wants it, that they get blacklisted, fired. So they're essentially blackmailed into committing fraud.
Yes. And every employee that works for the Canadian government that is participating in this, I'm sure there's quite a few that would rather not. But if you think about it, just like at Denton Central Appraisal District, do as you're told and you get a pension. I mean, we've got it on tape. The system has been weaponized, for lack of a better word, to steal mom and pop's money. Mm-hmm. The ramifications of that theft will end up being a depression that'll make the Great Depression look like a piker. I believe when this hits the fan, you will be looking at 35% unemployment. You will be looking at devaluation at a minimum on houses at 40% to get back to the real. If you can get it back to the real numbers quickly, okay, fine. You're going to avoid something bad. But you have to have people in power that understand, here's the math. And it's not that difficult to follow if you can explain it to them. Problem is, mom and pop can't explain it. When mom and pop walk into an ARB hearing, as a review board, they don't even have enough information to say, these are my comps. This is how the grid is set up on my comps. Now, the ARB board more than likely won't listen to them. However, that would set them up to be able to turn it over to an attorney. So one of the questions you asked in the beginning, okay, what could be one of the fixes? Well, in Canada, because the cost of litigation is insane and the timeline is a 10-year timeline. So what can be done, see, what we're doing here is we're now filing lawsuits against the individuals, not just the entities. So we're filing a lawsuit against Don Spencer, joint and severally liable individually. We will be filing lawsuits against the ARB members, against the RPAs. So because that's what the law allows, because if they signed an oath, they have violated their oath. And here in Texas, if you violate your oath, you're impersonating a public official. If you're impersonating a public official, it's a third-degree felony. And it goes up the chain into federal law and RICO, et cetera, et cetera. Well, in Canada, the best that could happen is a handful of people in a neighborhood to bring those costs down per person, file the suits. And you have to follow the Canadian law all the way up the chain. The problem is they're dissuaded from doing so because of the timeline. Ergo, the attack then must be on the politicians who are not doing their job. They would be, in fact, violating their oath. There's your attack.
My mind is blown after this talk with you here. Is there any other things that you want to touch on here before we wrap things up?
The problem is this is like an onion. It's got 1,000 layers. And every time you peel a layer, you just want to cry. Yeah, this conversation is kind of the 30,000 foot view. The reality of it is there's gigabytes worth of data. I mean, if you look at that document I sent you with the 10 pages of broken laws, it's mind boggling. I mean, the depth of this, like you were saying, see, it goes into the banks, it goes into the restaurants. So right now today, there's been 4,000 restaurants in the last 11 months that have closed in California because of the inflation. So when you start understanding that this stuff is all hooked at the hip and it all spins off of one simple fact, that the appraisals are fraudulent. All of these things are a ramification of that. The creation of the inflation is the American government and the Canadian government's dumbass idea where we're going to pay off our debts with inflated dollars that are worth less. That is a straight up tax. So it's a circular argument. It doesn't stop. And it bankrupts mom and pop along the way. It bankrupts your engine. Yeah. There's just no words to describe it other than feces for brains.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, inflation is the ultimate stealth tax. And do you ever look at shadow stats, inflation? Yes. Well, I love the data they produce there.
Yeah, that's all good information, but you got to take the next step and just break it down to the amount of taxpayers and see what the real number is per taxpayer. Now you've got the truth. And here we have a shadow banking issue. So by way of example, I happen to have firsthand knowledge of a property that will be foreclosed on more than likely within the next 10 days. And that's a shadow bank that's going to lose about $7 million. The equity is going to lose about $18.5 million. The property never got past 30% complete. The developer had a GC, the GC general contractor stole 2.7 million, and it just started to spin out of control from there. The bank that made the loan is a middleman bank, so it's not even a full-blown bank.
Right.
They, as an organization, went and borrowed money from another bank, act as a middleman in the middle to pick up the interest carry. Okay. So the middleman bank is going to get wiped out. The equity is going to get wiped out. The city actually filed a lawsuit to force the developer who doesn't have any money, or the bank who doesn't have any money, to tear it down because it's a nuisance. It's public nuisance. So right back to your word, shadow. This is stuff that's going on under the hood that mainstream media, mainstream press, A, they couldn't understand it. B, they don't know about it. And C, they just want to promote a line that isn't true. You and I know what the truth is because we talk to mom and pop every day. I got tenants. I talk to them at least once every day. I got hundreds of emails coming in from across the United States, and I'm responding to every single one of them. If it comes to me, I respond. If it goes to Leslie, she responds. My wife ends up, she's had a few of them, she responds, because we know what the distress is, and the distress at mom and pop's level is real. So we're simply sounding the alarm bells to you, the politicians that are in power. Get your act together, because I think I sent you this morning, there's a little billboard shot. There's actually a sheriff who's running on investigate the CADs, investigate the central appraisal districts. And that guy was at that emergency meeting, Kevin Henry, on the 15th of this month, literally stood up in front of these people and said, I intend to arrest everybody who is culpable in these crimes. These are straight up crimes against humanity. That's at the tail end of the day. That's what this is.
Yeah, it's straight up slavery, like you said.
Yeah.
It's absolutely shocking that this goes on. But like you said, I'm glad that we have people like you who are out there actually educating people on what's going on here, because, yeah, I mean, we need more people sounding the alarm on this. So wider acknowledgement of what's going on so we can push back and hopefully undo this.
Yeah, I think there's 8 or 9 videos. I don't even know the count, but on Travis's site, I mean, each video, is 30 to 50 minutes, but as a series with Jeremy Bagot, looking at it from the standpoint of the appraisers that are being forced to commit fraud as a series, and what you're doing here as a series, it can't be beat. I mean, you've got multiple people coming at this. There's a fella, his name is Fernando, and he's in Cleburne, Texas. Okay. Very small community. Hispanic guy, has 4 businesses in downtown Cleburne. He's going to lose his businesses, all 4, because he can't pay the taxes. That's how bad they hit him on the value. So what's the ramification of all that, right? And Cleburne, downtown Cleburne, is nothing to write home about to begin with. It's kind of like those old dusty towns with the sagebrush rolling across the street. But the bottom line is they're going to force this guy out of business. And these people who are doing this are straight up criminals. They're violating so many laws, and that's what we're doing. We're now pointing it out. We've now got the horsepower necessary here in the state of Texas. If we go federal and are forced to take this to the U.S. Supreme Court, we'll get more horsepower. There will be some people who will jump on and help out financially to accomplish that task. But nonetheless, we are where we are, and it's affecting both sides of the border. Canada's no better than what's going on here.
No, I would argue in some places it's even worse because it's just got so out of hand. I mean, the bubble is absolutely exponentially large in Ontario and British Columbia, and the fraud just completely rampant.
Well, and we have thousands of banks in the United States. You've got 4, plus the Bank of Canada. However, make no mistake, when you look at Case to Depot and you look at their assets and what they hold in Montreal, those assets will devalue. And they're not the greatest assets to begin with, but they will devalue 40 to 50%. Okay. Case to Depot is playing with pensioners' money in the stock market. When a stock market takes a 30% dive because Case to Depot isn't hedged. Okay. Congratulations. You've lost on the entire value of that pension fund 40 to 50%, and you'll do it within 12 months. Right. And when things go wrong, they're going to go really wrong really fast. And how do you go bankrupt? Well, slowly at first, and then one day you wake up and you're bankrupt.
Very true. I mean, if you look at the bankruptcy stats, they pretty much speak for that as well.
Anybody that's connected to a pension fund, you're going to have problems. In Canadian banks, you don't have very far to run. No. So no matter how you look at it, who are the pensioners? Mom and pop. Mom and pop is under attack on the value of their homes. So no matter what, mom and pop is being set up for the biggest fall in the history of Canada in the United States. Straight up set up.
And that kind of explains why so many pensioners are like running for the exits. They're going to places like Mexico, they're going to places like Panama, Colombia, all over really for lower cost of living, because they're just being like, they can't afford, they straight up can't afford to retire in the United States or Canada, and they're leaving because of that reason. So they have been bankrupted essentially.
Yes, and those countries are not as bad as they once were, right? Because what they did is exactly what I'm saying. Let these people make a living, and it will increase your economy. Panama, within the last 20 years, you wouldn't even recognize that country, right? They're rocking and rolling. But by inviting all these people in to retire, those people bring a lot of money with them. They may not spend it, but it gets into the economy. And that's why those countries are growing. And that's why, in truth, we're getting decimated. That's why your population, you got 500,000 people a year moving into Canada that are immigrants, okay? That's half of the population, of the natural Canadian population growth. 50% are immigrants, okay? If they're legal, that's one thing. If they're illegal, that's another. You, the taxpayers, are covering it off either way.
So true. And you know, Mitch, you'll find this really interesting because I know a lot about Panama, but generally the way property tax is actually paid, which is more how you would think it should be in reality, is like most people don't even pay it. So they're not paying it monthly or yearly. They don't even pay it. They just defer it to the end when they sell the property, and then they pay the property taxes. So it's not like they're leasing that land and they're paying that monthly fee to be on that land. Like they can literally, most Panamanians, they defer the property tax to the end, and it's such a small amount that, you know, maybe it's $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. Can you imagine if we did the same thing in Canada? For a start off, all those municipalities would go bust, all those local governments would go bust, and people wouldn't be able to pay the forfeited amount.
Well, okay, first of all, those municipalities that you're speaking of right now today, they're already broke. However,
true.
Because you opened this can of worms, watch this for a second. Under the 16th Amendment, Constitution of the United States, you cannot have a tax on unrealized gains. You can only have a tax on income, period. That's the 16th Amendment. That's why I keep saying I believe we're headed for the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, let's think this through for a minute. Market value, which is a requirement by these appraisal districts. Market value is based on having a willing buyer and a willing seller. That is what determines market value. That's one of them. Okay? Do you understand that market value is, in fact, an unrealized gain?
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned this, actually.
So under federal law, what's happening in the states or in the provinces cannot happen. This is a con on a massive scale. The state of Texas, by avoiding all these laws at the appraisal districts, and the state comptroller himself have in fact done an end run around the Texas Constitution and violated the Constitution of the United States of America simultaneously. There's no law that allows them to do what they're doing. Problem is the public doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah, and when you put it like that, a tax on unrealized gains, it is so clearly that, but it's never called that, which I think is really interesting. Obviously, they don't want it to be branded that way for a certain reason, because the US Constitution, I doubt we have that sort of rule in Canada. Canada has the Charter of Rights of Freedom, and they walk all over that, let alone the Constitution. It's just crazy because like you rightly said there, you need a buyer and a seller. You need the transaction to actually occur in order to get that value. How can you have a value which is fiction, essentially, because you've created it, the transaction hasn't even happened, and then you're taxing based off a future value which may or may not exist? So
yeah, but ergo, the reason to educate mom and pop, the reason to educate the odd bureaucrat who really does give a damn about the population. But what mom and pop can do collectively, because one individual can't do it, but collectively, if you've got 15 people on a block, you find an attorney and you file the suits, not against the entity, you file the suits against the individuals who violated their oath. Take them down. See, if you make it impossible for these entities to operate by suing the individuals, it's getting two bites at the apple. You can sue the Canadian government. You'll be in court for 10 years. Eventually, you'll win. But the reality is it's a hell of a lot easier to sue the individuals who are committing the crimes. That's what we're doing. And there's now 2 attorneys in Florida as of a few days ago that are working on the exact same thing. They're taking our documents. I was on the phone with them for 3.5 hours. One of them had his nose in a book. He's literally going down 2301E. So he's finding our laws that are coincidentally are within 98% accuracy of the Florida laws. So that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to go after the individuals and they're going to go after the state. The cases are the same. We're finding that Ohio, Illinois, Los Angeles, Michigan, North Carolina. Why North Carolina, I don't know, but nonetheless, that's one of the attorneys that reached out. So it's happening everywhere because people are desperate in that they realize the bankruptcies are here.
Well, that's great that it's actually starting to happen. Listen, Mitch, I've took up enough of your time this morning. Is there anywhere that you would like people to go? Obviously, there's your website. I'm going to put that in the description. Are you on any social media that you want people to be directed to?
I've never been on social media until Travis called me last Monday. Travis said, he literally said, this is who I am. This is what I heard you're doing this. And we talked for a few minutes. He said, you want to do a podcast? And like an idiot, I said, yeah, what's a podcast? I didn't know. So the best thing from an education standpoint, if you have the time, the series of videos, including this one that have now been produced, are by far the best vehicle to get up to speed. If you want to get into the nitty gritty, mockingbirdproperties.com/DCAD. There are links to the videos there. There's a behind the scenes, kind of like a firewall. If you put in the code and you're interested, we'll give you access to behind the firewall. But there's gigabytes worth of data, and the attorneys in Florida, that's what they're using. They're using behind the firewall to help build their case. So we've got all the information. There isn't anything that I believe that we don't have at this point. So if anybody wants it, either on an individual level or to sue, so that you can sue against the individuals, or your interest is suing the state for violating its own constitution, we have that information for you. All you have to do is follow the bouncing ball. We set it up.
Well, listen, Mitch, thank you. And I just pulled up your website and showed everybody while you were talking there. And yeah, please check out Mitch's website. Mitch, thank you so much. I'm sure we're going to talk again. Like you said, we're just peeling this onion and we've only just started with a couple of layers in this video. This is the end of part 2, and if you wanted to see this in full and not in the 2-part series, then you can go to the podcast channel, which will also be linked below, where you can get access to this video in full when they come out. All these podcast videos are posted there first. I will see you guys in the next one.